Lachlan Kennedy just ran the fastest 100 meters by an Australian in 23 years, in the rain, while living with a disease that's supposed to slow him down. He crossed the line, looked at the scoreboard, and couldn't believe the numbers staring back at him. Then, less than a day later, he had to do it all again. It happened at the 2026 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. The men's 100-meter final. Rain was falling, the track was soaked, and conditions were about as tough as sprinting gets. Kennedy had already run 9.94 seconds in his semifinal that same night, a personal best at the time. That alone would have been the story of his career. But nobody, including Kennedy, expected what came next. When the gun fired, Kennedy exploded out of the blocks and tore down the wet track. He crossed the line in 9.85 seconds. That single run shattered Patrick Johnson's Australian record of 9.93, a record that had stood untouched for 23 years. Kennedy didn't just break it, he blew past it by 0.08 of a second. He said afterward that he thought he'd done enough to win gold, until he looked up and saw 9.85 on the board. In his own words, he felt relief after delivering under pressure in brutal conditions. Gold still wasn't his. Cameroon's Emmanuel SM produced the run of his life, coming from behind late to win in 9.83 seconds, a new championship record that erased a mark set back in 1998. Kennedy took silver, but that silver medal meant something huge on its own. It was the first Commonwealth Games medal for an Australian man in the 100 meters since 1962. 64 years ended in the rain by a 22-year-old. Here's how rare that time actually is. Only 141 times in the entire recorded history of the sport has a wind-legal 100-meter run ever beaten 9.85 seconds. Kennedy's run placed him among the fastest humans who have ever lived and made him the 5th fastest man in the world for the year. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Kennedy wasn't finished at the Games. Not close. He still had 2 more races on his schedule: the 200 meters and the 4x100 relay. And before he'd even landed in Glasgow, he made his intentions clear. He said his goal was always to win, whether that's the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games, and that he doesn't focus on who else is in the race, only on running his best. So less than 24 hours after breaking a 23-year-old national record, Kennedy was back on the track for the 200-meter heats. He looked comfortable, cruising through in 20 seconds to move on. In the semifinal, he pushed harder, running 20.12 seconds, fast enough to punch his ticket into the final against one of the deepest 200-meter fields at the entire Games. South Africa's Sinesifo Dambile had been running the fastest times of anyone in the rounds leading into the final. Could Kennedy actually pull it off? Stick with this, because what happened in that 200-meter final tells you just as much about Kennedy as the record did. But first, you need to know how he even got to this point, because this isn't a normal sprinting story, and it explains exactly why that 9.85 mattered so much. Kennedy grew up in Brisbane playing rugby, not running. Sprinting wasn't the plan at all. Then in 2018, when Kennedy was just 15 years old, doctors diagnosed him with type 1 diabetes. That diagnosis changes everything about daily life. Every meal, every training session, every night of sleep has to be managed. Kennedy wears a continuous glucose monitor and has to track his blood sugar constantly, because getting it wrong during a race can shut his body down mid-stride. This is the exact reason his Glasgow run carries so much extra weight. He wasn't just racing the clock in the rain. He was managing a chronic illness in real time while doing it. Kennedy has said that diabetes in sport doesn't have to be a limiter, and that in some ways it made him healthier, more disciplined, and more in control of his own body than he might have been otherwise. He switched from rugby to athletics and within 2 years was racing for Australia at the World Under-20 Championships in 2022, where he was also part of an Australian junior relay team that broke a 12-year-old national record. From there, his times kept dropping year after year. In 2023, he won a silver medal in the 100 meters at the Pacific Games. A year later, he made his first Olympic team, competing at the Paris 2024 Games as part of Australia's 4x100 relay squad, a run that also produced a new national record for that event. By 2025, he had set the Australian record of 6:43 seconds over 60 meters, and later went on to win silver at the World Indoor Championships. Then in Nairobi that May at the Kip Keino Classic, Kennedy lined up against Kenya's Ferdinand Omanyala, one of the fastest men in the world, and beat him. Kennedy crossed the line in 9.98 seconds, becoming only the second Australian in history to break the 10-second barrier in the 100 meters. The first man to do it was Patrick Johnson, back in 2003, the same man whose record Kennedy would eventually break. In April of this year at the Australian Championships in Sydney, Kennedy ran 9.96 seconds twice, once in the heat and once in the final, becoming the first Australian man ever to break 10 seconds on home soil. After that race, he said it felt like a relief to finally call himself national champion, and that even though it wasn't his best race, he handled business and got the win. He also said he still had more in the tank. He wasn't exaggerating. A few months later in Glasgow, he proved it by tearing 11/100ths of a second off his own personal best in a single night, in the rain, on the biggest stage of his career. That kind of jump doesn't happen by accident. Kennedy has talked about wearing his glucose monitor through every training session, adjusting his meals around workouts, and building a level of discipline around his body that most athletes never have to think about. He said he believes living with type 1 diabetes actually shaped him into a healthier person than he might have been without it, because he's forced to pay attention to what most people can ignore. Kennedy is also an ambassador for a diabetes awareness organization back in Australia. His performances have made him one of the first known elite sprinters to break the 10-second barrier while managing type 1 diabetes at the same time. For young athletes carrying the same diagnosis, that's not just a fast time. That's proof the disease doesn't get the final say in what they can achieve. Now, back to that 200-meter final in Glasgow. The race went off, and Dambile proved his form throughout the week wasn't a fluke, taking the win in 19.96 seconds. Kennedy crossed the line in 20.41 seconds, finishing sixth. The double didn't happen. After chasing 2 medals in 2 days on the back of a record-breaking, personal best 100-meter run, his legs simply didn't have another podium finish left in them. Backing up a performance like that with a 200-meter final less than 2 days later is one of the toughest doubles in track and field. Even the best sprinters in the world don't always pull it off, and Kennedy was no exception this time. But that 6th-place finish is not what people will remember from Glasgow. The 9.85 is. That single run rewrote Australian sprinting history, ended a 23-year wait for a new national record, and delivered the country's first men's 100-meter medal at a Commonwealth Games in over 6 decades. Kennedy still had the 4x100 relay left to run at these games too, the event where he first made an Olympic team back in 2024. He's spoken about how confident he feels in that Australian relay squad, and how a medal there would round out one of the biggest weeks of his career. Kennedy is only 22 years old. He's already spoken about wanting to compete individually at the Los Angeles Olympics, after running relay heats for Australia in Paris back in 2024. He's currently studying engineering and business at university, training at an elite level, and managing a chronic illness every single day. And he still found a way to break a national record that had survived for over 2 decades. Patrick Johnson held that Australian record for 23 years. Lachlan Kennedy might hold it a lot longer than that. And based on everything he said about his goals for the Olympics and beyond, he's not even close to finished.